Hello students, welcome to Tobin Sharan team. Today's class is on the topic Old English period. Okay. Old English period is a fascinating era in British history that began with the invasion of the Anglo-Saxons in the 5th century and lasted until the Norman conquest in 1066. So, Old English period began with the invasion of Anglo-Saxons in the 5th century and it lasted until the Norman conquest in 1066. So, if we take the British history, this period, Old English period, can be termed as a fascinating era. So, in today's video, what we are going to do is we will study the major events and developments that shaped this period, and we'll try to learn how it laid the foundation for the English language and culture as we know it today. Old English period was marked by a series of significant historical events that had a lasting impact on British society, which means certain important historical events happened during Old English period. One of the most important of these was the invasion of Anglo-Saxons in the 5th century that we already discussed earlier. Old English period started with the invasion of Anglo-Saxons in the 5th century, and this led to the establishment of several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. And when what Anglo-Saxons invaded in the 5th century, what happened was several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms establishment happened. For example, Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and so on. So these kingdoms were often in conflict with each other, but they also shared a common language, culture, and religion. It was during Old English period Christianity was introduced to Britain, initially by the Roman Empire and later by Irish and Anglo-Saxon missionaries. So it was during Old English period the religion Christian was introduced to Britain, and this religion was introduced by Roman Empire, then later by Irish, then later by Anglo-Saxon missionaries. This had a profound effect on the culture of the time, as monasteries became centers of learning and scholarship, and the church played a key role in spreading literacy and education. And because of the introduction of this religion Christianity, what happened was religion reflected on their culture, because the monasteries became the centers of learning and scholarship. In today, the centers of learning is schools and colleges, but during that period monasteries was the centers of learning and scholarship, and it was church that played a key role in spreading literacy and education. One of the most significant cultural achievements of Old English period was the development of English language itself. Old English, also known as Anglo-Saxon, was a Germanic language that evolved from the dialects spoken by the Anglo-Saxons, which means another important cultural achievement is the development of English language itself, because the language used during that period was Old English, which is also known as Anglo-Saxon. Anglo-Saxon is a Germanic language, and that language happened through the dialects that is spoken by the Anglo-Saxons. Okay. It was a highly inflected language with a complex grammar and a rich vocabulary that reflected the Anglo-Saxon way of life. Many Old English words such as husband, wife, and child are still in use today. So the words husband, wife, and child are Old English words, but we use that words in modern English too. Okay. So despite the achievements of the period, it was also marked by significant challenges and upheavals. In the 9th century, the Vikings began raiding and settling in Britain, bringing with them their own language and culture. Then after this, what happened was, in the 9th century, what happened was Vikings came to Britain and they settled in Britain. So Vikings started to live in Britain. So what happened was Vikings language and culture they brought to Britain, and this led to a period of cultural fusion. So what happened was the culture of Vikings fused with the culture of Britain and exchange as the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings interacted and traded with each other. By the 11th century, the Old English period was coming to an end. Then, during 11th century, Old English period came to an end. In 1066, Normans invaded England and defeated the Anglo-Saxon king Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings. Then what happened was, in the year 1066, during the Battle of Hastings, the Normans invaded England and Normans defeated the Anglo-Saxon king whose name was Harold Godwinson. And this invasion happened during the Battle of Hastings. This event marked the beginning of the Middle Ages. Then this defeation started the beginning of Middle Ages and the Norman conquest, which would have a profound impact on British history and culture. So that's all about the Old English period. Now, to give you additional information, if we look at the literature and art of Old English period, the Old English period was also a time of significant artistic and literary achievement. The Anglo-Saxons produced a range of literature including epic poems like Beowulf. You might have heard about Beowulf. That is an epic poem. So that work was produced during the time of Old English period. Beowulf, which told stories of heroes and monsters, and religious texts like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which recorded historical events. So in addition to literature, the period also saw the production of the beautiful metal work such as the intricate designs found on the Sutton Hoo treasure. That's all about the literature and art of the Old English period. So if we look at the law and governance of the Old English period, during the Old English period, the Anglo-Saxons developed their own system of law and governance. So what the Anglo-Saxons did during Old English period was they developed their own law and governance. Each kingdom had its own laws and customs which were enforced by local courts and judges. These laws were based on the concept of vergeld, a system of compensation for wrongdoing, which helped to maintain social order and prevent feuds between families and clans. That's all about the law and governance of Old English period. So if we look at the health and medicine of Old English period, the Anglo-Saxons had a good knowledge of health and medicine. They used herbs and other natural remedies to treat common ailments and also practiced surgery for more serious injuries. In addition, they believed in the importance of hygiene and cleanliness and used communal bathhouses and saunas for personal hygiene. That's all about the health and medicine of Old English period. So if we look at the agriculture and trade of Old English period, agriculture was the main economic activity during the Old English period. The Anglo-Saxons grew crops such as wheat, barley, oats, and raised livestock like cows, pigs, and sheep. Trade was also important, and the Anglo-Saxons had extensive trading networks that stretched across Europe and beyond. They traded goods such as wool, leather, and metals for luxury items like spices, silk, and glass. That's all about the agriculture and trade of Old English period. Now let's look at the influence of modern English on Old English period. Finally, it is worth noting that the Old English period had a profound influence on the development of English language. Many words and phrases from Old English are still in use today, and Old English grammar and syntax continue to shape the structure of modern English. For example, Old English had a complex system of noun declension and verb conjunction, which influenced the development of English grammar. In addition, many common English words have Old English roots such as king, queen, house, love, and friend. Now let's look at the social structure during Old English period. During Old English period, society was divided into different classes with kings and lords at the top, followed by freemen who were skilled craftsmen and farmers, and then slaves, who were often captured in battle and born into slavery. Social status was determined by birth, wealth, and power, and there were strict rules and customs governing the behavior of each class. The That's all about the social structure. Now let's have a look at the religion during Old English period. Christianity played a significant role in Old English period, with many Anglo-Saxon kings and nobles converting to the faith. The church had a profound influence on society, and monasteries and churches were centers of learning, art, and culture. Old English period also saw the rise of important religious figures like Saint Augustine, who brought Christianity to the Anglo-Saxons, and Saint Bede, who wrote the ecclesiastical history of the English people. That's all about the religion. Now let's have a look at the architecture during Old English period. The Anglo-Saxons were skilled builders and architects, and their influence can still be seen in the churches, castles, and other buildings of modern England. One of the most notable of examples of Anglo-Saxon architecture is the ruined monastery at Lindisfarne, which was destroyed by the Vikings but still contains some of the most beautiful Anglo-Saxon stonework in existence. Now let's have a look at the warfare during Old English period. The Old English period was a time of frequent warfare and conflict, with Anglo-Saxon kingdoms vying for power and territory. The Anglo-Saxons were skilled warriors, and they used a range of weapons and tactics including spears, swords, shields, and bows. In addition, they built fortified towns and castles to protect themselves from attack. If we look at the decline and legacy during Old English period, despite the achievements, the Old English period was also marked by decline and instability. By the 10th century, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were beginning to lose their power and influence, and they were increasingly threatened by Viking and Norman invasions. However, the legacy of the Old English period continued to shape the British culture and identity, and it remains an important part of the country's history and heritage. Now let's have a look at the food and drink during Old English period. The Anglo-Saxons had a very varied diet, and including meat, fish, vegetables, and fruits. They also drank mead, a type of alcoholic beverage made from honey and water, as well as beer and ale. Food and drink played an important role in Anglo-Saxon social life, with feasting and hospitality being highly valued. Now let's have a look at the clothing and fashion during Old English period. Anglo-Saxon clothing was generally made from wool or linen, and included tunics, trousers, and cloaks. Clothing was often decorated with embroidery, and wealthy individuals would wear jewelry including brooches and rings. Women's hair was often worn in long braids or pinned up in elaborate styles, while men's hair was generally short and sometimes styled with braids and beads. Then let's have a look at the music and entertainment of Old English period. The Anglo-Saxons enjoyed music and entertainment, and they had a rich tradition of poetry, storytelling, and song. Harps and lyres were popular musical instruments, and minstrels and bards would entertain audiences with tales of heroic deeds and romance. Board games and sports like horse racing were also popular forms of entertainment. So, to conclude about Old English period, that was a period of great change actually and development, that marked by significant historical events, cultural achievements, and challenges, from the invasion of the Anglo-Saxons to the development of the English language. This period laid the foundation for English culture and language that we know today. So, to summarize today's class, we discussed about the literature and art of Old English period. We discussed the law and governance of Old English period. We discussed the health and medicine, agriculture and trade, influence on modern English, then social structure, then religion, the architecture, warfare, decline and legacy, then about the language of Old English, then the food and drink, music and entertainment, clothing and fashion. We discussed everything. I think I touched all the points of Old English period. So if you find today's audio class useful, please subscribe to Tobin Shagan team. Bye bye.